Welcome to the Jagged Mood podcast. My name is Dr. Paul Hamilton. I'm here with Professor Hunter Reeve, and we are here to discuss the amplitude of time. This topic comes from a phrase from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and what we want to do is to discuss different perspectives on time. Before I introduce the episode more fully, I would like to introduce Professor Hunter Reeve, who I'd like to hear her perspective on this.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, I wrote a poem that relates to the relentlessness of time, but it also relates to timelessness. It's kind of in the middle, and we'll be talking about both those aspects of time. And we'll be speaking about Robinson Jeffers, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, and Virginia Woolf.
Yes.
And I'll read my poem also.
Yeah, so we're going to survey a lot of poetry for you here. And we're also going to include multiple perspectives on time. So why is it that we want to talk about this subject? Well, I think that as abstract a topic as time seems to be, it actually conditions fundamentally the way that we experience our lives. If we experience time as a kind of relentless machine, a conveyor belt, ticking away every minute until our doom, then we're going to have a very panic based view of time. And I think that view, strangely enough, is kind of the modern view of time, which I think requires examination. And what we want to do is think about that. I don't think that it's a view that is easily dismissed. I don't think it's just an illusion. I think, though, that there are other ways to look at time. We can access the reservoir of poetry and the treasure of literature and art in our own language, and we can find other perspectives on time that are life-giving, expansive. And our touchstone for this episode is Whitman's phrase, the amplitude of time, from his poem, Song of Myself. And so we will be discussing that in more detail. But we have, as Professor Reed pointed out, we have at least a couple different views of time. We have, I think, the one that all of us, kind of know about and inherit, and that can create a kind of existential, a state of continual existential dread, as if every sort of, as if your life is, to use a phrase from Emily Dickinson, my life had stood a loaded gun, or as if your life is like a stick of dynamite with a fuse that's about to blow up, or something like that. And I think that, that this is well captured by W.H. Auden's poem that is entitled, where is it here? As I walked out one evening, and the stanza goes like this: but all the clocks in the city began to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. The idea that we're going to fight with time. This is kind of American, isn't it? Everything's a conflict. Even though Auden was British, it's or very Western. We're in a fight with time. We're trying to conquer time, but time ultimately is going to destroy us. So it's established as kind of a fight. Who's going to win? There's also the image there of the clock as a kind of a machine began to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you. You cannot conquer time. It's like the relentless movement of time is coming like a gigantic the clock machine to devour you, or something like that, right?
Yes, and I'd like to discuss my poem that relates to it, but goes a little bit further, I think, and I'll discuss that.
Go ahead.
I'll read my poem. The lead line is repeated in the beginning and the end of the poem, and the line is, "The knife of love sharpened itself on my heart. I traveled in a narrow valley of lightly shining trees. Relief found me, and I knew we would meet again. Though we were so far apart, it was chancy. Angels sang in the body of a cat who longed for consuming affection. A bright blue light appeared by my side, proving my spirit. I hope our meeting is soon. They say I'm old. The knife of love sharpened itself on my heart." So people seem to identify with this poem. I got quite a few hits as a Facebook poet. And I think it's because I start out kind of desperate and worried about meeting this person I really care about. But then it gets into more of the spiritual and angelic side, and I realize that I may meet my friend even though she or he is far away, and it might be chancy, but I have hope. And Auden's poem really doesn't, and other people's doesn't hold too much hope often. It's just the boom, 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 relentlessness of time that has a destroying element on us. And everybody knows we age, but I think there's more involved in time than just the fastness of humankind and birth and death, as is repeated in Robinson Jeffers' poem Thurso's Landing, when he says, one character says to the other, "I'll not live as my life between a knot between two nothings. Wear a pair of round zeros for pearls." So this character wants to make the most of his life, and he's pretty optimistic about it, and he's not thinking so much about the fast velocity of time. So, Paul, would you like to add or go
Yeah, I
on
mean,
with
that poem really, it in my mind, it connects to Shakespeare's song, Ariel's song in The Tempest, in Shakespeare's Tempest. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look, nothing of him doth remain, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. It's this idea of, somehow the imagination or nature itself is transforming what appears to be nothingness into something rich and strange, a transfigured vision. In Jeffers, it's zero for pearls, right?
Right.
And it's that image of taking this nihilistic view of time, that time is something that just retroactively cancels out the meaning of your life, and converting it into something rich and strange. And I think that this is and Jeffers captures the modern horror, the view, and then I think that you do have to kind of encounter that horror and kind of to come out to the other side of it. And I think that this is the view of time, is this from the subjective perspective, as a kind of relentless machine devouring you, and from the universal perspective, which he evokes there, which is which would be maybe put in a modern sense, that taking modern theories of physics into consideration, that the universe itself is just on its way to heat death. That the final period of the universe is the period of black holes, which the Buddhists might call the realm of the hungry ghosts, with just devouring themselves until finally the last atom of the known universe is smashed to bits, and everything and everyone that we've ever known and everything that we've ever known is simply turned into the swallowed up by the last black hole. And that's the horror. It's a horror at a personal level. Of the horror of chronological time is the horror at a personal level, and a horror at a universal level. Of course, I think that without going, I think that our expertise is the area of literature. Without going too far into the physics, I think that you could still probably suggest that there are that chronological time may not go on as we currently understand it until the end of the universe, or maybe it goes on to the end of the universe and then it becomes something else, something much less familiar, something much more rich and strange. So those kinds of views may be pretty narrow, but I think that that's kind of the horror that modern consciousness is trying to grapple with, using metaphors that come from our experience of factory work, our work lives, our experience of, I punched into a job, literally punched into a job. So I was on the clock, my previous job every day. So I think that I know what it's like to feel like a punch clock, or a clock that's punched in the early part of the day and the late part of the day. So, but I think that is the problematic that a lot of poets like Auden are trying to work through. We talked about Virginia Woolf having that incredible passage in To the Lighthouse, Time Passes, that you've often mentioned, Hunter.
Yes, Virginia Woolf writes about time. You can almost see it passing in front of your eyes. And she talks about how important time can be to a child who is confronting an adult, and that she says that this child may remember what the adult said that was kind of traumatizing for the rest of his life, and that time is important. It isn't just, she just doesn't talk about the passage of it, but the importance of it between human relationships.
Yeah, so I think that, so that just going to kind of establish what we're talking about when we're talking about the nightmare of time, the framework of time, and this kind of, but I think that, that people don't think about this, but this conditions, it gets underneath a lot of our anxiety and terror, really, about time. But one of the things that I find so amazing about the Romantics, for example, the Romantic poets, for example, is that they seem to understand very early the consequences of mechanizing everything. And they among the things that they rebelled against many things. They rebelled against slavery. They rebelled against monarchy. They rebelled against parents, and elevated childhood. They rebelled against cities and the machines and the factory and elevated nature. But they also elevated eternity in as against this mechanistic view of time. And one of my great heroes has always been William Blake. And you go back to one of his very first poems in the Auguries of Innocence, where he says, "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." And then he does it in that poem by dilating and expanding time and expanding your experience of time and your sense of the generosity, the abundance, what Whitman would call the amplitude of time. As you experience it, you watch it happen in the poem. Read this one more time. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, and hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And he does it right there before your eyes. This is one of the great rebellion by the Romantic poets. And of course, in America, we inherit this tradition through the great Romantics, prose stylists, Thoreau and Emerson. And Thoreau in Walden Pond somewhere says that time is the river I go fishing in. Of course, Emerson also in one of his essays, I think the Oversoul, says, the spirit sports with time. And that is the experience of the deep self, experiencing the exaltation of timelessness, participating in timelessness in art.
Yeah, I might just for a moment go back to Blake. That Blake does time analysis in his drawings and paintings often. And I remember this painting my father pointed out when I was a child was the moon, and this figure having a ladder to the moon, and the man, I believe, who was the figure, saying, I want. And this is way ahead of the moon travel and
200,
yeah,
at least 200 years.
200 years.
1860, 1760.
And Blake was pretty amazing in his genius, speaking about time.
Well, but Blake's mythology, of course, the mythology that he constructs, is all about realizing or this recognition that the given world is what he calls the mundane shell, and that the true world, from his point of view, is the imagination in its organizing capacity to create eternity in an hour.
Right.
And that is the reality from Blake's point of view, and he has a kind of Neoplatonic view. But actually, it's really Blake's own view of that he experienced. He says elsewhere, I give you a golden thread, wind it into a ball, and it will lead you something about to Jerusalem's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall, or something along those lines.
Right.
I should find the exact quote.
And
but
also,
the golden thread being art, being
right,
poetry, language, will lead you to Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the promised land of imaginative vision. That this reminds me of the sound of the visionary poem that you just read.
Yes, and as you pointed out, Blake had many visions, and when he was a child, he said that he saw God, which I'm sure he did, and he put his head out the window and was yelling that he saw God, and he has so many visionary paintings that shows, as you say, his own world and mystique.
Yes, and so he realized the vision that he described. Just to give you that exact quote, which I just called up on the internet. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball. It will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. So the idea that that wonderful reservoir we have to draw on, the treasure we have, in this kind of modern world that comes, as we, um, with our nursery rhymes and our, um, our, our dolls and our toys, we also imbibe a nightmare view of time. And the great poets like Blake give you a path out to experience a liberation outside of that. Um, Let me give you another. Let's say, did you have something else that you wanted to say about that first? And
No, I just wanted to reiterate that it's just marvelous that Blake had such a great imagination and visionary power and could construct this in his own terms and show the world. It was great that he left us all his marks of these visions and his basic construct of them and his imagination.
yeah, absolutely. And I might add before I continue on to the Whitman that there's a wonderful story by Jorge Luis Borges called The Secret Miracle, which speaks about the mystery of subjective time. It's about a man in World War II who is Jewish, and he is sentenced by the Nazis to be executed. And as he's being taken out to be executed, and he's awaiting his execution, suddenly he realizes that time has stopped, and that and he wonders why at first, but he realizes after some time of wondering why this has happened that he's been given this sort of dispensation to finish his poem. He has a great work that he has left incomplete, and he had been wondering how he was going to finish it. And in that moment of time, before he is awaiting the firing squad, he is able in his mind to go back through every square line of the poem, they all written in hexameters, very Borges, these footed lines, and to complete the poem. There's an added twist of irony, which is that the poem it's actually a play written in poetic meter, and the play itself is insane. But so he's given this great dispensation to finish his poem, which is completely insane. It doesn't make any sense. And as you get deeper into it, it gets into more and more ironies about time. But it wouldn't be Borges if it wasn't a little mad as well. But what always struck me is just the subjective experience of time that is a mystery. So many aspects of human life seem to have been demythologized or demystified, let's say. But one thing that is always going to be sacrosanct is the first person experience of subjectivity, and especially the experience of time, which we know is so elastic.
Yes, and Borges also talked about time in his great short story, The South. And his rather autobiographical, when he was suffering from a blood disease. He was hospitalized and almost died, and he had these visions and dreams. And also he went blind slowly but methodically from retinitis. And I have an eye disease also, and I can really identify with him, although I have medication that saves my eye, and he didn't have that. But he is still able to geographically talk about where he is in his time and lay out the town he's in and such. But it's also the story is also very existentialistic. It's one of his gaucho cowboy tales. And at the end, time is just relative because he's realizes he has to fight this person, and instead of being fearful, he says, although I was without fear, I was also without hope. And so he is able to continue his time on Earth, and no one knows at the end of the story if he's killed or what happens to him, but he's still able to survive moment by moment in the story, and he's not destroyed at the end of it.
Yeah.
So,
And it's just very interesting because even as we're talking about timelessness and poets evoking timeless moments, they also, it strikes me as the evidence of the timeless experience is that these works have survived, and for Blake, you're talking about 200 plus years. He's called it a timeless moment, and it was. I mean, that he said, "I'm connecting you to something more permanent," and he was. Those words lasted. These stories lasted.
yeah.
And so I think that sometimes we have an intimation of immortality, and then something else happens, and it feels as if time has actually had the last word, and yet actually there is something permanent in these experiences that we may not realize.
Right.
And if you want to take it to the ultimate, it may decomposition of the universe ultimate, I think that you could, perhaps in some mystical sense, it's participating in some energy that is a timeless feature of the universe. That is what, Coleridge said that poetry was the eternal I am that was reproducing itself in every moment, that it was an emanation of this eternal being that is reproducing itself in every moment and renewing and revivifying itself in every moment.
Right.
Well, that is a great claim for poetry, which I absolutely, and I love great, bold claims for poetry because I'm a great advocate of poetry.
Yes.
And I think the bolder, the better.
Right. There's a poem that I know in Middle English that is by Geoffrey Chaucer, and he's saying really that no matter who you are, it doesn't matter. In your time, you should have dignity, and it really is superfluous if you're a king or a pauper or whoever you are. And it goes like this. This first stalker, father of gentilessa, what man not crimes gentle for to be, but follow his witters and all his witters dresser, virtu to sewa on vices for to flee. For unto virtue longeth dignity, and not the reverse dothly dare a demon. So he's saying that in time his belief was that a person should show their dignity, have a dignity within them, a characteristic of that, and that it didn't matter who you were, you needed to have that, and that's in his poems of dignity. So
Yes.
that's interesting.
Yeah, that's
in
lovely.
his time, and he lived
The 13th
hundreds
century.
of years ago. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We have to mention the ocean because we're right near the ocean.
Right.
You can hear the ocean in the background quite wonderfully. We're sort of just relishing and savoring this experience next to the ocean. But Keats has, speaking of eternity, I would mention this morning this poem that I kept thinking about as I was near the ocean. It keeps eternal whisperings on desolate shores. I think that's the line. I'll have to look it up to double check, but it keeps eternal whisperings. And I think we can hear the eternal whisperings behind us.
Yes.
It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns. And while we're on the topic, it keeps it of the eternal whisperings. The ocean itself is eternal, and we're near. When you're close to the ocean, you feel as if you're both near a kind of God, but also somehow on the pulse of the entire earth. But while we're on the topic of Keats, Keats also spoke very fondly of the mighty dead. We were talking about people he called the mighty dead. We were talking about the authors and the writers whose voices still live, for whom the experience of eternity or the experience of an eternal timeless moment was not just a fleeting subjective experience, but it was something that they bequeathed to us as a crystallized timeless moment. The mighty dead, and those mighty dead that speak to us because they are still alive.
Yes, my poem about the ocean talks somewhat about what you're saying. It goes, the blue waves grow louder, like spirits from uncovered graves, sighing deeply, then tumbling, telling me that they inhabit another life. Musical sounds from a deeper sphere, spraying rainbows as they go, penetrating their force to my senses. So the ocean really seizes me and marks me as a person who is in a sense, part of the ocean. My personal belief is that we came from the ocean, and as Paul was discussing, it's very powerful and penetrating. Just living near the ocean, and you can hear the waves as we speak.
Yes, absolutely. The voice of the waves is in part of this podcast. And when you hear the ocean, you're touching, in some sense, something primordial, but also something that is right in the present, keeping its eternal whisperings around desolate shores. I think that that's absolutely right. I can't help but think, since we're talking about the mighty dead and the ocean, water, I've always been haunted by Keats's epitaph, which he wrote when he was very sick with tuberculosis at the end of his life. And in a moment of despair, because I think it captures this dynamic between this eternity and the claustrophobia of the modern experience of time. His epitaph that he wrote, and he actually didn't want them even to put his name on his tombstone. He just wanted them to he wanted to be buried under these lines: "Here lies one whose name was writ in water. Here lies one whose name was writ in water." And it's as if your name is written in water, it's as if he saw himself as just disappearing into anonymity. But it's such a almost mystical image, to have your name written in water. I mean, I think all of us, our names are written in water in some sense. Um, it seems as if it's intended to be despairing, and yet it it has something mystical about it, because water is pregnant with life, and it's where we come from, it's where we return to, and so that's quite mysterious. But I want to get back. Did you have any comments on that, Hunter?
Not right
Okay.
now.
Okay. So I want to get back to Whitman, who's the author, whose phrase we've given the title of this podcast to. Whitman is one of the great heroes of timelessness, eternity, and one of the great romantic rebels who stands up against this mind. I was going to say this mind virus sort of. Although, as the moment I say that, that phrase has been poisoned by Elon Musk recently in a sort of despicable context. So I don't want to think of it that way. But this let's say this ideology, and he takes it on head on, because I think that the Romantics all, in a certain way, they understood that these things that they seem simply to be objective views. Some guys saying, well, the years passing by, what's more objective than that? But Whitman and Blake and Thoreau and Emerson, Wordsworth in his stronger moments, understand that this is a kind of intimidation. It's a way of intimidating you, and also a way of alienating you from your own reservoirs of strength, and from your own inheritance, because we don't just inherit the chronological view of time, we inherit the eternal view of time. So this is Whitman in one of his amazing stanzas. Whimpering and truckling fold with powers for invalids. Conformity goes to the fourth removed. Oh no, sorry, starting over again, one stanza earlier. I do not snivel the world over, that months are vacuums and the ground but wallow and filth. Whimpering and truckling fold with powders for invalids. Conformity goes to the fourth removed. I wear my hat as I please, indoors or out. Why should I pray? Why should I venerate and be ceremonious? Having pried through the strata, analyzed to a hair, counsel with doctors, calculated close, I find no sweeter fat than sticks to my own bones. In all people I see myself. And he goes on to say, I know I am deathless. I know this orbit of mine cannot be swept by a carpenter's compass. I know I shall not pass like a child's curlicue cut with a burnt stick at night. I know I am august. I do not trouble my spirit to vindicate itself or to be understood. I see that the elementary laws never apologize. I reckon I behave no prouder than the level I plant my house by after all. I exist as I am. That is enough. If no other in the world be aware, I sit content. And if each and all be aware, I sit content. One world is aware, and by far the largest to me, and that is myself. And whether I come to my own today, or in 10,000, or in 10 million years, I can cheerfully take it now, or with equal cheerfulness I can wait. My foothold is tenoned and mortised in granite. I laugh at what you call dissolution, and I know the amplitude of time. That is the great romantic, heroic response to this intimidation, bullying of the modern era into this nightmarish view of the machine of time come to devour us. And Whitman is there to say, this is an underestimation of the attributes of the human soul, of the human spirit.
Right, that's very important, because I really believe that our spirit lives on in a very timeless way, and thus time is seen in several different ways and can't be confined to the relentlessness and fear of time and timing.
Absolutely, and it's this glorying in and realization of the greatness of the human spirit. I often think about the Elgin Marbles and my first experience of the Elgin Marbles in at the British Museum, and I often think actually that if I lived near these things, I would wake up every morning and just go and get a cup of coffee and just dwell with the Elgin Marbles, because when you're with these magnificent marbles, the Elgin Marbles were, I think they were chiseled. They were created by Phidias and obviously many workers in ancient Greece, and they are depictions of a procession of horse riders horse riders in a procession. But what is so staggering about them is the unbelievable subtlety of the human form, the sinews. It's as if they are about to leap out of the stone that they are chiseled into, and it is just something utterly awe-inspiring. And I felt, when I saw it made me think of Shelley's line where he says that poems are the mask and mantle through which poems walk through eternity. They're the mask and mantle through which the great poets, walk through eternity. Percy Bysshe Shelley in his defense of poetry. The masks and mantles through which poets walk through eternity. I felt like as if these are the souls of these artists that created the Elgin Marbles were so gigantic that they cast their shadow across thousands of years, across eternity, and I felt that this was. I felt that the expansiveness, the largeness of the human spirit, and how uncontained it was by chronological time. So speaking of uncontained, I think that there is one other aspect of the response to time that I think that I want to leave us with in closing here, and these are the great moments of exiting time in Whitman and in Dickinson. And so we'll start off with Dickinson here, and Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Now, we had a whole podcast on Because I Could Not Stop for Death, but we have to mention it, right? Because this is the great poem. This is the grand transcendence of time, or you could even say, I don't know, transcendence may not be the right word. I think it's she disappears from time, or leaves time, exits time in this poem. Do you want to read this?
Sure.
Yeah.
We can trade off every 2 stanzas.
Sure.
Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun.
or rather, he passed us. The dews grew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tully, and paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So I have a couple comments on this poem in relation to our theme. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. This is these gorgeous opening lines, and that idea of stopping. The idea that time is like a clock that stops. It refers us back to Dickinson's early poem, A Clock Stopped Not the Mantles, in which the clock stopping is a symbol for death, as if we're locked into this chronological time, right, in our lives. And so here, she can't stop because her chronological time stops. Death stops for her. He kindly stopped for me. And he stops for her not by stopping her time, but stopping to pick her up, as if he's a suitor come to take her on this journey. And she goes on this journey through her past. School children at recess in the ring, past the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. So they're not passing the setting sun, the sun is passing them. They're exiting time. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling in the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So you have this disappearance, this grand disappearance from time itself, first surmise the horses as you have time, space expanding to an almost infinite length. You have time contracting and expanding at the same time.
And also, there's a great irony in that she may not be ready for death, but death may be ready for her. And one never knows when or why to expect it. And it doesn't mean that she's in a whirlwind of fear about death, because it doesn't seem like that in the poem. It's just that death can catch up with her at any time, and she, even if she isn't expecting it.
Absolutely, yes, and it's a romance. He stops for her, and there they are driving to eternity with immortality, who is the what is it, the person that's attending on them. When in the 19th century they used to have, if you were dating, you'd have an attendant there. Right. I forget what you call that, but immortality is in the carriage there with as a kind of personifies as little
a chaperone.
A chaperone, yes, exactly. And then she beholds the house. It seems a swelling of the ground. I love that. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. That grand, almost kind of aristocratic. The grave is not a grave, but it is a swelling of the ground. So we had to include that magnificent passage, and then finally, Whitman imagines his own death here at the end of Song of Myself, in his own wonderfully original way. I too am not a bit tamed, I too am untranslatable. He's referring to the spotted hawk. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me, complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. And here is where the visionary part begins. The last scud of day holds back for me, and this is a great to read on the ocean. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies. Do you remember we passed the setting sun, or rather he passed us. I shape my white locks at the runaway sun, the sun departing chronological time, runaway sun. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun as if he is part of the foam and the vapor of the waves. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. He becomes the ocean in these lines. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nonetheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep in courage. Missing me one place, search for another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. So death kindly stops for Dickinson. I stop somewhere. He is somewhere on a journey that is endless, and he's stopping for us somewhere. Wherever we are in that journey, he's stopping and taking us the next step. This is a move. He melts into nature. He becomes one with his poetry. He becomes a spiritual guide for anyone reading his poetry. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. Wherever you are, he is there. That is the sort of spiritual movement into immortality that he's made there. What do you think about that those last stanzas?
I think it's triumphant because he's not fearful. I mean, as you say, he's in one part of his journey. His journey doesn't end there, and he's able to continue on. But it's just amazing that his sense of time is not just the fearful sense, but it's something else and something rather new in poetry.
It's utterly triumph. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies, drifted in lacy jags. That is certainly one of the heights of American poetry. It's one of the great resources and reservoirs of the greatness that is within us. And I think that Whitman, just beauty. I do not, to go back to that earlier line from where he says, I do not snivel the world over, that months are a vacuum and the ground but wallow in filth. Similar to Robinson Jeffers about the, what is it, between two nothings.
I'll not live my life as a knot between two nothings.
Yes.
Wear a pair of round zeros for pearls.
Exactly. That is the resources of the soul, human spirit that is commensurate with this. And I think that it is, the idea that, this specter of chronological time. Blake called it chronos. He mythologized it as chronos, and he knew that he had to defeat this, mythologically speaking, that he had to free himself. I must be. I must invent my own system or be enslaved by someone else's, right? And that's the. That is our discussion of the amplitude of time, the generosity of spirit that each of us has within us. We can have access to the resources of literature in order to open up the prison bars. We do not have to be in this continual crisis and confrontation with time. It's not. This is a function of the modern era and a kind of modern nihilism, and the poets know better. My conclusion. What did you want to say at the end here, Hunter?
Yeah, again, I feel that the poets are triumphant in their search in and for time, and they don't stop at one point. They reach their arms up and to the heavens and say, I'm not done. I have much more to do in my soul's journey.
Yes, to see heaven in a wildflower and
Exactly.
eternity in an hour.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. The spirit sports with time. Time is a river I go fishing in. All right. Well, thank you very much. And that's the end of this episode of the Jagged Moon podcast on the amplitude of time. If you have any questions, please send them in the comments or send all of your messages to Hunter Reeves' email. No, I'm joking. Please leave messages on the comment, or you can join Hunter Reeve on her Facebook page, Hunter Reeve Poetry. And until next time, look forward to seeing you. Take care.